Well, it is my pleasure this evening to continue our study in prophecy. We started in creation here and went up to Abraham and the covenant that God made, the foretelling, the prophecy of what would happen in the future to his descendants, how they were captive in Egypt, and how the Lord brought them out of Egypt. And so I want to kind of pick it up there before we get into some of the main prophecies that I know you're wanting to learn. You know, everybody wants to know Revelations. People get saved right away, they start reading the book of Revelations, and you don't understand it. But it's really not hard to understand if you understand the book of Daniel and the prophecies that are in the book of Daniel. Because those 7-year period of what we call the tribulation and the 3.5 that are called the Great Tribulation are nothing more than an expanded view of certain portions of the book of Daniel. And so it's kind of like the climax or culmination of it all. And, you know, to rush into this, I think would be detrimental to you understanding prophecy. It's not really hard to understand, but I'm going to go real slow. And Brother Eric didn't put a time limit on it, so if he wants to teach something, he'll just have to shut me down. But I don't want to just rush through and give you a bunch of stuff and you're just pounded with a lot of information. I want to very methodically take you on a journey through the Bible prophecy that will help you understand the whole Bible's prophecy. And that's what separates this book from all other books of religion. And it all focuses on one theme, Jesus Christ. And everything else is just kind of a direct or indirect way of getting us to the culmination of all things in the kingdom of our God in eternity. And so I remember I was in classes for refrigeration and air conditioning, and the instructor there at the school, my brain is always going a jump ahead. I'm always figuring something out down the line. And he was telling me something, and it was confusing me because I says, well, what about this? And he said, I don't want you to learn that yet. He says, I know where you're going, and I know it's wrong. You're right in your thinking. He says, but I want you to understand this way first, so then when we get down the road, you can understand what I'm going to teach you. And Jesus told his disciples that there was many things that he wanted to share with them, but they weren't ready to receive it. And so I could right away tell you everything that these things mean, but I want you to go on a journey with me through the scriptures, and we'll let the scriptures tell us what they mean. Okay. History tells us what a lot of these things mean. We can draw from history because some of it has already happened. But I want you to see how it all connects, because when you understand the book of Daniel here, you'll understand the book of Revelations. Now, I wouldn't say you're going to understand it in its entirety. I've been studying for 40 years the Word of God, and I don't understand all of it. Matter of fact, some of it we're not going to understand. You know, the thunders were not written. John heard them, the voices of the thunders, and God said, don't seal it up, don't write it. That was just for his hearing. And so God doesn't give us everything, but he gives us the insight and the understanding to get the global picture of things. And I think that he reserves certain things for certain individuals, and that's okay. It's his kingdom, and it's the way he works. And so Daniel, the book of Daniel, is kind of a methodical, progressive, successive revelation as you study the different prophecies that are there. But I want to get us to the book of Daniel and how we got there, and we'll do a little bit of history. And so I want to talk about the book of Daniel and its dreams and visions. But before we get there, I want to just go way back to the covenant on Sinai, where God took a nation out of Egypt, brought them out with a strong hand, smote the firstborn of Egypt, and delivered them and took them through a wilderness journey and made a covenant with them at Sinai. Now, God said, if you'll keep these blessings or keep these covenants of mine, I'll bless you. If not, I'll curse you. And he said, I've put before you life and death. You choose life or death. And he warned Israel what would happen when they would disobey him, or their hearts would go away from the Lord. Okay? And so I'm going to pick it up in Deuteronomy chapter 29. And God's warning them of what's going to take place in the prophecies if they're unfaithful to God. And what people are going to say when he does the judgment on them. And this is long before it's ever happened. Hundreds and hundreds of years before this is ever going to happen. Okay? But God's already warning them right at the beginning. He says, and even all nations shall say, wherefore hath the Lord done thus unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? Then men shall say, because they have forsaken the covenant of the Lord God of their fathers, which made them, or which he made with them when he brought them forth out of the land of Egypt. For they went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they knew not and whom he had not given them. So God said, if you leave me, this place is going to be a wreck. And everybody that comes along is going to say, what happened here? Why did this happen? What's the meaning of this great wrath that's come upon this land? And why did God do this? And they're going to say, God's telling them before it ever happens, they're going to say, because you went serving other gods. You didn't follow after me. And so let's go on to chapter 30 here in verse 1. He says, and it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessings and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all nations, whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee. In other words, they've been run off. And shalt return to the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then will the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity. In other words, he's going to set him free from bondage and slavery, and have compassion on thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. Who scattered them? God did, because they were unfaithful. If any of thine be driven out to the uttermost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. In other words, you can't go far enough to where God can't reach you and pull you back. That's the hope of every backslider. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into a land which thy fathers possessed, thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good and will multiply thee above thy fathers. Wow, that's an extended promise, isn't it? And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. So here we see God making a covenant, and Israel goes through into the promised land. They go through approximately 400 years during the time of the judges of a very dark time. They're like yo-yos. They're up and down with God. They're vacillating all the time. There was a time that it was so dangerous. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes, and they didn't serve the Lord. But when they turned their hearts back to God, God would send a judge to deliver them, and they would have a good time. And then they would drift away and start going after other gods again. And that was a real problem with Israel, because God chose them to show him to the world. And instead of them showing the one true God to the world, they were wanting to worship false gods with the world. Okay, so this was a real struggle between Israel and God, and Israel had a hard time staying faithful to the Lord, even to the point where they no longer wanted a theocracy. They no longer wanted the judges, and they went to Samuel and said, give us a king. And God already told them what, before they ever asked for a king, what was going to happen, way back with Moses. And so here they are. God knew they were going to ask for a king. They wanted to be like the rest of the world and have a king. God wasn't good enough for them. Samuel felt real offended about it and was kind of sulking about it. And God said, they haven't rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me. They didn't want it. They wanted a monarchy. Okay, so they got Saul, and he messed up. And David come along, and he's our hero. He's the man of praise. He established a lot of our worship today, and our songs that we sing, and how we worship, and all that comes right out of the Psalms and the tabernacle of David. And so that was great. And David had a son named Solomon. And Solomon was favored of God. God was pleased with him. He was given wisdom above anybody that would ever live before or after. He was the wisest man in the world. People came from all over the world just to hear him talk, to sit in his court and listen to how he did things. And they were mesmerized by his wisdom. Yet, in the end, when he got old, he became a fool and started worshiping other gods with wives that he shouldn't have married to start with. He did for political reasons, and they turned his heart away from the Lord and actually started worshiping false gods. And the Lord was so angry with this that the Lord judged Solomon, but not in his lifetime. He told him what was going to come after he was gone. God gave him, and God, for David's sake and for Abraham's sake, kept Israel, a part of Israel, a flame, a light in Israel alive. And so here in 1 Kings 11, you see all the tribes there, and that's how they were arranged in order of the land of Canaan. And the Lord says here in 1 Kings 11:11, he says, "Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee and give it to thy servant." So God said, you're going to lose the kingdom. The kingdom's going to be taken away from you, and I'm going to give it to somebody that serves you, which would have been ultimately Jeroboam. In verse 31 of that chapter, it says, "Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 tribes unto thee." In other words, God was calling a man named Jeroboam, and God's saying, I'm taking the kingdom away, and I'm going to give you 10 tribes, Jeroboam. You're going to be king over them. Okay, now this actually took place after Solomon's death. So when he died, his son Rehoboam took the throne. He was not wise like his dad in the beginning, and took the counsel of young men rather than the wisdom of the old men, and divided the kingdom by his lack of wisdom in dealing with the people. And so we now see that we have a divided kingdom, and there were 17 kings, the northern 10 tribes that you see up there on the screen, and there was 19 kings and 1 queen for the tribes of the south. And Simeon was kind of like enveloped into Judah. Simeon was kind of in the center of Judah. It was the smallest of the tribe, and it's kind of got assimilated. So they count the 2 tribes of Ephraim as those tribes. Okay, so we got basically Judah and Benjamin to the south, and they had some good kings. They had a lot of wicked kings, and they had a wicked queen, Athaliah. She was the daughter of Jezebel, and she was very wicked, killed her own grandkids so that she could take power. That's how cruel and vicious she was. And the Bible spells that all out. And so in 721 BC, because the 10 northern tribes would not serve the Lord, they just kept messing up, and God sent prophets to them. And they wouldn't hear the prophets, and they killed the prophets, and the prophets were running for their lives, and God allowed the Assyrians to come and take those 10 northern tribes captive. Okay, so and what happened was they took a lot of the Jewish people away. The Assyrians did to their land, and they populated Assyrians and mingled with the people of the 10 tribes. So in Jesus's day, that's why, unless you were from Judah or Benjamin, they viewed you as a half-breed. That's why they wouldn't even go and consider walking through the city of Samaria, because they weren't true-blooded Jews. And so even though they claimed to be Jews, the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, they looked down their long noses at them and said, they're not true, authentic Jews, because of the intermingling with the Assyrians, and they weren't pure-blooded. And so Judah there sees the 10 northern tribes captive, but they don't learn a thing from it. They start waffling just like the 10 northern tribes, and So the word of God came to a good king by the name of Hezekiah and foretold something that was going to happen. In 2 Kings 20 and 16, it says, Isaiah said, the prophet came to the king unto Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. Nothing shall be left. Wow. And thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Hezekiah's response to that's always blown my mind. His response, instead of, I'd have been blowing my mind, ripping my clothes, saying, oh God, he goes, oh good, it's not happening in my day. It's like, okay, well, God's going to do that. So, that's cool. As long as it don't happen in my day. It's like, really? I just could never relate to that. But it was a prophecy of Israel's impending captivity because of their sin. Now, God's dragged it out and delayed it for various revivals that kings brought on because they turned their hearts and the people back. But then another wicked king would come along and they would sin, and then Israel would be in a whole lot of trouble again. And so Jeremiah prophesies in Jeremiah 25, verse 11, he says, this whole land shall be desolate and astonishment. I mean, when people walk through, they're going to go, what happened? Isn't that what the Lord told through in Deuteronomy? That people were going to say, what means this great anger? The land is going to be an astonishment. You got to understand, Israel in the time of Solomon was at its pinnacle, its peak. And it was one of the greatest nations in the world at that time. And God set them up to be that way, to be a beacon of light. But Solomon messed it all up. And so Jeroboam didn't keep up with what God told him to do. And he turned away from the Lord. And it was just disaster for the northern tribes. Now it's off and on again for the southern tribes. And so the whole land is going to be a desolation and astonishment. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. God said, you're going to be in captivity 70 years. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon. And that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it a perpetual desolation. So here we are. Now in 606 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar comes and conquers Israel. Okay, he puts people, he takes the king away, and he puts other in his stead. He's got his own men there, and he takes a lot of the best, wisest, smartest men in town and in the nation, takes them to serve him over in Babylon, and leaves the laborers there to work the fields and to provide food for his kingdom, not theirs. And they revolt, they rebel. Sometimes they think they're going to go against the king. And God said, serve him. In fact, at one point they came to Jeremiah, you tell us what the Lord says. Should we go down to Egypt, or should we stay here and serve the king of Babylon? So over a week goes by, and God finally speaks to Jeremiah and says, tell him to stay here and serve the king of Babylon. And they said, we'll do whatever the Lord says. So Jeremiah comes back and tells them, God said, stay here and serve the king of Babylon. They said, we're going to Egypt. God said, really? We'll see whose word stands, mine or theirs. And so they were in a very rebellious state. And so they ended up into the Babylonian captivity. Then in 586 BC, because of their rebellion, Nebuchadnezzar came back and totally destroyed Jerusalem, tore that place down, crumbled the walls, tore the temple apart, stole everything out of it, took the big, huge brass. I can't imagine how Hiram cast those big brass pillars, man, that were 2 columns of solid brass. I mean, they broke it up in pieces and hauled it back to all the glory and the grandeur. A multi-billion-dollar facility to worship God was totally destroyed. And the king of Babylon took it all for his own gain. Now, that was for 70 years, and then they came back. Okay. But during that 70 years is when the book of Daniel happens. Okay. The book of Ezekiel was a contemporary of Daniel. Jesus said something very unique, though, in Luke 21 and 24. He said, Jerusalem shall be trodden down under the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So, what are the times of the Gentiles? The times of the Gentiles started when Israel was conquered in 606 BC. Okay. God intended Israel to rule the world, but because of their sin, he allowed Gentiles to take over. And we're still in the times of the Gentiles. The nation of Israel is there, but it's not free of the Gentiles. They're still there in Jerusalem. You got the Dome of the Rock. The Arabs are taking over. You know, they claim that for their holy site, and it's a mess over there, isn't it? So we're still in the times of the Gentiles. And so what we're going to do now is that we're going to look at the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel is divided primarily into two parts. The first six chapters are primarily historic. There's prophecy in it. We're going to start with a prophecy in it. But then the last six are more prophetic. And so we're going to start with Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. Chapter 1 talks about how Daniel and his boys arrived there, and they stand up for God's dietary plan, and how they were blessed of God because they did. But something happened to the king, and we're going to find out about that. And it's always intrigued me that God used this pagan king to bring revelation to Israel and to the world, really, and to the church, so we understand what's going on. And so in Daniel chapter 2, starting with verse 1, it says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded all the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans and to show the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. So the king said, man, I got this dream. I need all the wise men to come and tell me what this dream's about. But the problem was he couldn't remember it. All right. So this is a dilemma. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. You ever have a dream and you wake up and you feel all messed up, but you can't remember what it was? That's what happened to the king. He was like, man, I dreamed something, but I can't remember what it was, but I want to remember it because it was important, but I can't remember it. And it troubled him. And so he got all of his wise men, his magicians, his astrologers, everybody, Chaldeans, they all come trotting in there, and they're ready to do it. And he spake to the Chaldeans, and then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Listen to his response. And the king answered, said to the Chaldeans, the thing's gone from me. I can't remember what it is. You guys that are supposed to talk to gods, right? If ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. Nice guy, huh? Can you imagine one of those wise guys? They were probably, living pretty good in Babylon, with their soothsaying and all their religious stuff and their astrology and all that. And the king just lays it on the line. Look, if you don't tell me what I dreamed and what the interpretation is, I'm going to cut you in pieces, and I'm going to have your house made a dunghill. We're going to pile the horse and the cow manure right on top of it. A very, very nasty dude. They were very, very troubled by that. So he says, but if ye will show the dream and interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards, great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. I'm ready. And man, they started negotiating with him, trying to explain to him, nobody's ever asked this and all that. And he says, that's it, you bunch of frauds. You want me to tell you the dream so you can make up something. Now, if you really have the interpretation, you can tell me what the dream is. And they couldn't do it. So he says, kill them all. That's what he said. Nice guy. Oh, did I mention that he took one of the kings of Israel and had his boys there and killed him in front of his eyes and then burned his eyes out so that'd be the last thing he saw? This is the kind of guy we're dealing with. Okay? He's a warlord. He's tough. He has no mercy. And he's ready to kill all the wise guys, all the men of wisdom in his kingdom. And so they come, and Daniel gets wind and says, "Well, why is the king in such a hurry here? Why is he so hasty with the order? Tell him I'll give him a dream. I'll interpret his dream." So Daniel and his friends started seeking the Lord about it, and God gave Daniel the dream that night. And so Daniel's response in chapter 2, verse 20 says, Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." Listen to what Daniel says. This is really a very powerful thing that you need to understand when you wonder what's going on in the world. Okay? "And he changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings." Who shifts the politics and the political environment in the world? God does. "He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding." Look what Daniel said here. He changes the times and the seasons. Now, that's really important because we're going to start getting into times and seasons in the prophecy. And so Nebuchadnezzar had another dream in chapter 4, and it's where he tells his conversion. You know, he had this dream that Daniel interpreted in chapter 2, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. He got so excited, man, he made a big idol about it and wanted everybody to worship it. That's where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got thrown in the fiery furnace because they wouldn't worship this image that Nebuchadnezzar built in the plain of Dura. Well, he got really puffed up, and he forgot that he said there's no God like the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He can do whatever. He can change the king's words. Nobody changed Nebuchadnezzar's words. Okay. And so judgment was pronounced against him for his pride and his arrogance. And I really believe I'm going to see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. I really do. Because he got converted, but he lost his mind for 7 years. He ate grass like a cow until his sanity came back to him. And so listen to what Nebuchadnezzar says, or what the dream that he had. He had another dream in chapter 4 in verse 17. It says, "This matter is by the decree of the watchers and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know." Why was this masterful, mighty king, why was he insane for 7 years? Why was he plagued with that? "That the living might know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men." You would think God would put the best men in politics, wouldn't you? It's not what it says here, does it? It says God will set up the basest of men. So we live for God no matter who gets into office. You understand what I'm saying? It doesn't matter. We're children of God. If the Roman government was here and we had to live under the early church's persecutions, we'd do that. Okay, so we don't. I'm not telling you not to go vote. I went and voted yesterday, and you should get involved in that. But don't make that your hope. Don't make politicians your hope, because they're not. God can use them, and he does use them to bring about his will. Okay? All right, so Daniel got the dream, and he got the interpretation. Now he approaches the king here in verse 26. "The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar," that was his Babylonian name that the king gave him, "Art thou able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof?" Can you really do this, Daniel? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king hath demanded, cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king?" He says, "You asked the wrong people. They can't tell you. the answer to this. He says, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets. Who, I'm right in there with, I'm tight with him. And maketh known the maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days, future. Thy dream and the vision of thine head upon thy bed was this. As for thee, O king, Daniel's telling him now what's happened. There's no way he can know this except for the God that reveals secrets told him. Okay? The king's in his bedroom. He's laying on his bed. How would Daniel know that? For as for thee, O king, thy thoughts came to thine mind upon the bed, what should come to pass hereafter? In other words, man, when I'm dead and gone, I wonder what's going to happen. What's the future going to be? He's just kind of laying there in a kind of a twilight sleep, just thinking about, his great kingdom. And man, I wonder what's going to happen to all this. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known unto thee what shall come to pass. God chose this pagan king to reveal the future to him. It's amazing. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me by any wisdom that I have more than any living. Daniel's not taking credit for this. But for their sakes, because you was going to kill them, that shall make known the interpretation to the king, that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Wow. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee. The form of it was terrible. That means awesome. It was an awesome image. The image's head, it had a head. It was made of different alloys. It had a head of fine gold, his breast and his arms. Now, can you imagine, while Daniel's saying this, all this is starting to come back to the king's mind. Yeah, I was wondering what was that. Yeah. And he sees this image in his mind now. It's coming back. The fog is clearing. And he again is seeing this image that he dreamed about and forgot. And Daniel's calling it to memory now as he's explaining to his dream that he had. Had arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet were iron and part clay. Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet that were iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken into pieces together and became like chaff of a summer threshing floor, just ground to powder. And the wind carried it all away. It was no more. It was gone. No place for it. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. So Daniel just told the man his dream. And I got to tell you, his mind is blown. That's it. That's my dream. He hit it. He knocked it out of the park. It's now real clear now. The fog has lifted, and God's revealed it to the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings. He was a true monarch. In other words, he didn't share his power with anybody. He ruled supreme over the whole known world at that time. Nobody challenged him. He set up and he killed at his discretion. And nobody said, what do you do? He was almost like a god. Nobody could challenge him. He had that much authority and power. And Daniel's telling him in this dream, you're a king of kings, and the God of heaven has given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Daniel's telling him, God gave you this. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven hath he given into thine hands, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. In this image that he's seeing, we got it laying down because it's so long. and it spans some time. But this head of that image, there's only one head, isn't there? He's the head of gold in this Gentile image. This beautiful, awesome, magnificent image that was shining and glowing almost with the sun on it. And Daniel says, you are the head of gold. You're a pure monarch. There's nobody that's has more authority than you. And so God gave you that. And he goes on to say, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. And you say, how is it inferior? Not in power because it conquers them, but in authority. It's not the one that rules this kingdom or this governmental structure of this next kingdom is not a head, it's two arms and a chest. Okay? Another shall arise in fear to thee, and another, the third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So there's a succession of kingdoms that Daniel's now revealing to this king that are going to happen. He says there's going to come the silver kingdom where silver is inferior to gold, and it's going to take over. And after that, there's going to be a kingdom of brass, which is inferior to silver, and it's going to take over. You understand how that goes? Okay, that's what it's talking about. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, but it's inferior to brass, not as valuable, iron. For as much as iron breaketh to pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, it shall break in pieces and bruise. So it's going to be a very violent, forceful, damaging kingdom that's going to come in this fourth kingdom. So we've got four kingdoms here that Nebuchadnezzar has been given information on. The head of gold, which we now know by the book of Daniel that Babylon is the head of gold. Okay, so here we have the head of gold, then we have the silver kingdom, the second one that's going to come after the head of gold. Then after that comes this brass kingdom that's going to overcome the silver kingdom. And then after that comes these legs of iron that are going to overtake this brass kingdom. Okay. But there's something unique about this kingdom we'll talk about in a little bit, because it's got 10 toes. Oops, I went back. Well, I lost my place here. Where are we at? 43. One more. I was hitting the wrong button. So we got these 10 toes and feet that are iron, part of this kingdom, but down here at the bottom of this statue or this image, we have a mixture of iron and clay. It's kind of like mixing oil and water, isn't it? Iron strong, it's going to have the strength of iron, yet it's going to have weakness built in it too. Okay. So he says, whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with the miry clay. And as the toes of the feet are part of iron and of part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another. These last portion of this kingdom, what we call the 10-toed kingdom, they're not going to be buddies. Okay? They're going to unite, but they're not going to be palsy-walsy about it. Matter of fact, we'll learn more about that later. And in the days of these kings, what kings? These 10-toed kingdom. Okay, because in this iron kingdom, there's two parts to it. There's two timelines. And these 10 toes shall, in these last days, when it comes to the last days, the end of time, we're going to see these 10-toed kingdoms come into power again. They're a revived portion of this iron kingdom, but not totally. They're mixed, and we'll learn about that as we progressively go through Revelations with Daniel's different visions. And so during these days, of the days of these kings in the last days, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, talking about Christ, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people, but it shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, because he saw this stone without hand being cast at this image. There's the stone. It hit it at his feet first, remember, and then ground it all to powder, and it blew it away. That's what this stone kingdom is going to be. And we know that stone kingdom is going to be the kingdom of God, because Daniel's telling us this in the interpretation. So in the last days, God is going to come as a stone kingdom and grind the Gentile kingdoms to powder, and they won't be remembered anymore. And this stone is going to become a mountain, and then it's going to fill all the earth, the kingdom of God. We call that the millennial kingdom. And that kingdom shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it breaking in pieces the iron, and the brass, and the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God of heaven hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. The dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure. In other words, you can count on this. I'll guarantee you it's going to happen. So what we learn from this revelation or this dream, that from the time that Nebuchadnezzar in 606 BC conquered Israel, started a kingdom of the Gentiles, a time for the Gentiles to rule on the earth, where Israel is not the predominant nation, and it's been in succession unto our day right here, about here. Okay? And so we learn that there's from Daniel that there will be four great powers. We learned that from this vision that the first power was the nation of Babylon, the head of gold. Okay? And the fourth kingdom, the iron kingdom, will be in two parts in time. Okay, so we have the succession after the brass kingdom, where the iron legs conquer, but then the feet with the 10 toes will be in the last days. So there's still a portion of this dream that have not been fulfilled, and that will happen during the tribulation. And so that's why he said, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, and that kingdom is going to stand forever. That's where Jesus come. That fifth kingdom that's going to come and be established by God, it will never end. It will never be overthrown. It will be established forever. Okay, so 606 BC, from this vision that we've learned, starts the beginning of the Gentile kingdoms. And we learn that in this vision, there's four elements. There's the gold, which is Babylon, because Daniel just told us that. Then we have a silver kingdom. We don't know what that is yet. We got to wait to find out. But God's going to reveal it to us through his word. And then there's going to be a brass kingdom. And then after that, an iron kingdom. And then in the last days, the 10-nation union of the 10-toed kingdom, iron mingled with clay. And we see that, and we know that because Daniel's explained all that to us already. And in the days of the 10-toed kingdom, God's going to come and destroy that Gentile kingdom, and he's going to establish his everlasting kingdom, and he's ushering in the kingdom age. When Jesus talked about the gospel of the kingdom, he was not talking about the gospel of Jesus Christ. He was talking about this era right here. after the tribulation. And so remember, you got to understand who's being spoken to here in the prophecies. Now, God's letting us in through his word on how the Gentile nations were established and prospered during these periods of times, all for a purpose. Remember, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men and giveth it to whomsoever will, and he sets over it the basest of men. Okay? But everything that had happened prior to here was all to get the gospel out for this dispensation of the church age. So we're seeing that, and Daniel reveals that and reveals the information. Now, we're going to learn more about this as we start looking at the different prophecies that Daniel have in succession. The information we build on it. So it's line upon line, precept upon precept. We're going to continue to build on it and learn a little more each time we get more revelation, and we'll piece it all together. And you're going to see how it goes back and forth, and we'll even enlarge on these things, and we'll learn more about these different kingdoms by different means, okay? God revealed the Gentile kingdom to Nebuchadnezzar, and it was magnificent. It was a beautiful statue. I mean, and I really believe that image that Nebuchadnezzar built in the plain of Dura was the image that he saw. He was so mesmerized by it, he just made himself an image of it and wanted everybody to worship it like it was some kind of god. He was a pagan man. What do you expect out of a pagan? That's all they know. And so when God revealed the Gentile kingdoms to Nebuchadnezzar, it was magnificent. It was shiny. It was glitzy. It was beautiful. When God now, we're going to start in the last half of the book of Daniel. We're going to go to chapter 7. And when God reveals to Daniel the Gentile kingdoms, he doesn't show the Gentiles in a light of magnificent, beautiful statues. He shows them as raging animals, beasts. And so the book of Revelations, we have 4 beasts that God has, that Daniel saw in his dream, that God has described. Now remember, look, we got 4 beasts. How many metals do we have? 4. So we're going to get a little more insight, and we look at the order of how these things come into existence. Okay, and this is how you tie it all together. Now let's go to Daniel chapter 7, starting with verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. This is getting close to the end of the 70 years. Daniel's an old man now. Had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heavens strove with the great sea. That's talking, that great sea is talking about the Mediterranean Sea. And he saw just waves crashing and just really rough waters, and the wind strove with it. And it was like a big hurricane storm, tides and all kind of crazy stuff, kind of like what Hawaii got the other day. And 4 beasts came out of the sea. Now, the sea is a type of nations and people. The waters are in prophecy are noted as people. But these 4 great beasts, which we now already know that there's 4 great nations or powers, Gentile powers, that from the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Now we see Daniel's dream and how God depicts it to Daniel in this dream. And so these winds strove with it, and there was 4 great, and they were different one from another. They were diverse. And he describes the first one like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. So here we have a lion with eagle's wings. This is what it looked like that Daniel first saw. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on its feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, we didn't take the time to go through Nebuchadnezzar's conversion. I just brushed on it on chapter 4. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. He went insane. But then his understanding came back to him. First thing he did is bless the Most High. That's what people do when they got a right mind. Okay? So here we're seeing that, and it's really kind of prophetically depicting that in the prophecy here of what happened to this lion. Nebuchadnezzar lost his kingdom for 7 years. He was in the vision, and in his dream was a great tree, and it was hewn down and cut down. So the wings were plucked. Okay, so we're seeing the lion now as Nebuchadnezzar or as Babylon. It was the first in Daniel's 4 visions, 4 beasts, and it was the first in Nebuchadnezzar's dream right here. Then the second one was, behold, another beast, a second like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth of it, between its teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. So this second beast is a bear that Daniel saw, and it's in line with the silver kingdom. We don't know what it is yet. We haven't gotten the revelation of that yet in the scriptures. But it's terrible, and it was terrible enough to be able to overthrow the Babylonian Empire. Matter of fact, it overthrew 3 empires coming into power, because that's what the 3 ribs stand for. And then we go on to verse 6. And after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon its back of it 4 wings of a fowl. And the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So this 4th beast, the leopard, is symbolic to the brass that Nebuchadnezzar is. It's the 3rd kingdom of the Gentiles that came into power. Now, this last one. Said, after this I saw in the night vision, and behold, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. Now listen to this. And it had great iron teeth. Now, what do we associate with iron? The 4th kingdom. Okay. So we get the clues. You see the clues? You see how the dream is coming about, and it's aligning itself to the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel's dream, the beast is now, we're starting to pick up fragments of in parts of it that correlate with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And it devoured and brake in pieces. And listen to this kingdom stamped the residue with its feet of it. Okay. Feet. So we've got this kingdom that has iron teeth, but it also has feet, and it takes it into the prophecy in the dream. It makes note of the feet. Okay, so we know we're looking at the same thing, this 4th kingdom that Daniel interpreted for Nebuchadnezzar. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and something different. Now we learned something more about it. But here's the number 10 again, okay? It had 10 horns, not 10 toes. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. So this little horn came up in the head of this beast, and it was plucked up. It plucked up 3 horns when it came up. So 3 of the 10 were wiped out as this little horn came into power. Okay? Remember, these horns are kingdoms or nations that are aligned themselves. Remember, I told you there's no lovey-dovey in this one. It's iron and clay don't mix together. Okay. And so it came up, and before that were 3 horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And so this horn in the dream came up, but it had eyes like a human, and it was speaking great things. I mean, it was blaspheming God. And I beheld, I watched it. I watched this little thing spouting off to God until God came down, until the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and his hair on his head like the pure wool. His throne was like a fiery flame, and his wheels, the wheels that were on his throne, that most kings had to move their throne around as they traveled because they were always warring and conquering, as burning fire. So this dude, this little horn was spouting off until the Ancient of Days came. Now we know who the Ancient of Days is. Without father, without mother, without beginning or ending. The first, the last. A fiery steam issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 billions stood before him. And judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld them because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, that little horn. I beheld even until the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flames or hell. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away. Remember? Stone ground it to powder. They're gone. They were taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came in the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given to him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom that shall not be destroyed. Okay? He's got an everlasting government, doesn't he? Isn't that what Isaiah said? For unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. So guess who's the one that's sitting on the throne, the Ancient of Days? It's the Son that was born. It's the mighty God. It's the everlasting Father. It's the Prince of Peace. Okay, so you see where all these scriptures back in the Old Testament tie up with Jesus when he's going to come right here and everything's going to be established for him in the kingdom. Now, Daniel interprets it. Listen to what Daniel interprets, verse 16. I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this, and he told me and made me known the interpretation of the things. These great beasts, which are four kings or kingdoms, which shall rise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the other, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were iron, and his nails, now we're talking about feet now. He stomped with his feet, but guess what? His feet had nails of brass. So in this last kingdom, this last beast that Daniel saw, we have elements of two kingdoms now, don't we? We have brass and we have iron, which would mean regionally there's nations that are going to be a part of these 10 horns or 10-toed kingdoms. So we can look back to the beast, and when we jump ahead, and I won't get into it all, but when we jump ahead to Revelations, you're going to see elements of all the kingdoms in that beast, all the Gentile kingdoms, and what they stand for. And the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellow, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints. Now that's not talking about us. It's talking about Israel. So don't get confused here, and prevailed against them. Hitler's going to be a schoolboy, child's play to what this little horn is going to be to the Jews. And he prevailed against them. That's why Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel stand in the holy place, run for your life. Don't go home. Don't do nothing. Head out and just pray you're not pregnant. It's going to be bad when this happens. It's not going to be good. This period of time, this 7-year period of time, and we'll learn about Daniel's 70 weeks, but this last week, the 70th week, it's a time of Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah says. Who's Jacob? Israel. It's a time that God is dealing with national Israel to bring them to national repentance, so that when he comes back, they'll accept him as their Messiah this time. They rejected him when he came the first time. They will receive him, but it's going to be a very hard road for them to go through in the process. Let me see where I'm at. Oh my goodness. Well, let me just leave you there. I'm sorry I went so long. Time flies when you're having fun. Am I helping you, Annie? Are you starting to understand? You're getting the slower we go, the easier it's going to be to understand. Like I could tell you all these nations and who they are and why, but if we'll just got something here. Okay. If we'll just take our time and go through these things, you're going to say, well, gee, that's not hard to understand. You already know there's 4 kingdoms coming or have come, and there's one portion of the last one that already came that's going to happen in the near future. We will not be here for that. We will know about it through the scriptures. But this is a time of God dealing with Israel after the church is out of here in the rapture. We're caught up. Okay? So we're not going to be here for this scene, although we do know what the Word of God says, even though we also know what's going to happen here and right here and all that. We're not there yet in time. We're going to go up, skip around, cross the heavens, have a party and a wedding and a supper, and come back down and rule and reign with them for 1,000 years. There's benefits to living for God. This ain't a fairy tale. All this happened. It happened so accurately that the critics tried to say it had to be written after the fact, but it wasn't. The prophecy is pure. Daniel said, the dream, it's right, and the interpretation, sure, you can count on it. It's going to be just like that. And it has, and it will. What remaining portion of that dream in Daniel's vision yet to come, and we haven't even gotten through chapter 7 yet, but if you want to, you can read chapter 7, read chapter 2 of Daniel, and then when we come back, Lord willing, next week, we can pick up here on verse 21. Okay, let's stand. And we got a special needs. Sister Weibel has been having chest pains today and not doing well. So can we just, before we dismiss, let's dismiss.